So here we have a little table showing us the different machine types, as well as the different pricing. So here you have your regular price. So if you started, let's say, an N1 standard 1, you'd be paying about 4 cents, about 5 cents every hour for that particular machine type. Here, right next to it, the column right next to it shows the preemptible price. And what you notice for a majority of these machine types is that you only get to pay 21% of the original cost. So you're saving about 79% of about 80% of what you typically pay if you chose a regular instance. And so if you're just like wanting to tinker around in GCP, I always highly advise using a preemptible virtual machine. I think it is worthwhile and a very cost effective, especially if you're playing around initially and not doing anything serious. PVMs are the way to go. So let's just scroll down through this. The value stays the same for most of them, maybe some minor fluctuations, up until we hit the F1 micro, which is you're only getting about half benefit, but I mean the instance already is pretty tiny, and this is like the cheapest instance you can get. What is pretty awesome is that you get the same amount of savings with an N1 Ultra memory one. So if you have a massive workload that needs to work with 160 CPUs on about 4 terabytes of RAM, you only pay $5 for every hour. So let's say you got $10 to spare. Hey, go use 2 hours of this, and you can brag about how big of a CPU you just launched to all your friends. All right, so PVMs, in my opinion, great resource to know about, great resource to use, and hey, it's all about saving money. So now that we've seen that we can save quite a bit of money by using preemptible virtual machines, let's talk about some of the few gotchas or things to note about using these PVMs. The first thing I want to mention is that for the 24-hour counter to be reset, your PVM has to go through a terminated state. So it has to go from a running state, so PVMs will be in a running state when they're doing work, to a terminated. You can do this, by the way, manually. You can actually go ahead and stop your VM and restart it, and that will restart the 24-hour counter. By the way, that doesn't mean it will take another 24 hours before it gets preempted. It still means that, because we know a preemptible virtual machine can be preempted at any time, it just means that, hey, listen, you have an extra, at most, 24 hours before terminal preemption happens. The next important thing to note is just because the virtual machine itself is a lot cheaper, doesn't mean things like premium operating systems, as well as local SSDs and GPUs will cost any less. These actually cost the same. So your Windows, your Red Hat, your SQL Server, all the premium operating systems that you pay for, depending on the number of CPUs you have, those will cost the same, as well as local SSDs and GPUs. What you can change when it comes to local SSDs and GPUs is the quota. So you can say, hey, for my PVMs, I actually want to use a certain amount of quota for these particular resources. And local SSDs and GPUs are lost after preemption. So once preemption hits, these resources are reclaimed back by Google, and you cannot recover any of the work in your SSDs, in your local SSDs. If it's a persistent disk, that's a different story that you can keep. Same thing with GPUs. They're lost after preemption, and they're not automatically recreated or reassigned to your VM when you restart it. So you have to do that process manually. Another thing to note, and this may blindside you, is that whenever you stop a virtual machine, persistent disks that were attached to that virtual machine that were not automatically deleted, there's an option to select that. Those persistent disks that still remain will still incur a charge. So if you have, let's say, like a 2 terabyte SSD hanging around, it's still going to incur your cost unless you delete it or release it in some way. Preemptible virtual machines are not available on the free tier. And so for those of you who are hoping to use this within a free tier, unfortunately, it's not possible. So you will be paying for a PVM, even though the price is highly, highly deducted.